What makes a war film feel real? Not the explosions, not the uniforms, but the invisible details, the grit, the fear, the stillness before chaos. British filmmakers, more than anyone, have a talent for precision. Their war stories weren't about glory, they were about truth. From officers who doubted orders to sailors who never saw land again, these films got the little things right. And once you see them, you'll never look at war movies the same way again. Number 15. The Colditz Story. 1955. It begins not with gunfire but with silence, the kind of silence that fills prison walls. The Colditz Story took a real chapter of British military history and made it pulse with human ingenuity. Based on the accounts of actual prisoners held in Germany's most notorious fortress, the film follows Allied officers who turned confinement into a chessboard of escape plans. What makes it extraordinary is its precision. Director Guy Hamilton, who later brought us Bond thrillers, shot the film inside the actual Colditz Castle. Every corridor, cell, and barred window you see, that's the real place. The production didn't rely on drama for its tension, it relied on truth. The cast, led by John Mills and Eric Portman, plays their roles with understated brilliance. Mills captures the quiet British endurance that defined men trapped but not broken. Instead of romanticizing escape, the film treats it like strategy under pressure, blueprints, disguises, and coded signals instead of explosions and heroics. Cinematically, it's restrained, but that's the point. The Colditz Story doesn't need spectacle to convince you. The claustrophobia, the dust, the creak of boots in hallways, that's its realism. It showed audiences that courage isn't just about battlefield charge, sometimes it's about waiting, watching, and planning. Decades later, historians still praise it as one of the most authentic prisoner of war films ever made. Number 14. The Desert Rats. 1953. Before the desert became a movie cliché, the Desert Rats captured the North African campaign with meticulous attention to reality. The title refers to the nickname of the British 8th Army soldiers who fought the heat, the dust, and an enemy that never stopped coming. Director Robert Wise didn't aim for propaganda, he aimed for truth. The film's desert warfare feels blisteringly real because Wise worked closely with actual veterans to recreate conditions they remembered vividly: the rationed water, the blinding sandstorms, and the endless waiting between bursts of chaos. James Mason, reprising his role as Field Marshal Rommel from The Desert Fox, brings gravitas and fairness to the portrayal of the opposing side, while Richard Burton delivers one of his earliest commanding performances as a weary but unbreakable officer. What makes The Desert Rats stand out isn't just historical accuracy, it's how it captures morale under impossible circumstances. The soldiers are shown not as mythic heroes, but as men half-mad from exhaustion, still cracking dry jokes to stay sane. Wise's camera stays close, sometimes too close, letting the sweat and grime speak louder than dialogue. For a film made in the early 50s, it's astonishingly respectful of both sides. There's no grand victory, no triumphant music, just relief and sometimes guilt. In doing so, The Desert Rats honored the very people who lived it. It's not just a war movie, it's a survival story dressed in khaki. Number 13. The Hill. 1965. The Hill doesn't take place on a battlefield, it's set inside a British military prison in North Africa. Yet it might be the most brutal war film Britain ever made. Directed by Sidney Lumet and starring Sean Connery in one of his rawest performances, this movie turns punishment into psychological warfare. The hill of the title is a giant mound of sand prisoners are forced to climb again and again under the desert sun. It's not about combat, it's about cruelty disguised as discipline. What makes the film eerily realistic is how it captures the machinery of authority. Lumet built the set using real military schematics and studied British Army punishment routines to ensure every order, every shouted command, felt legitimate. Connery, fresh from his early Bond fame, strips away glamour to play a soldier breaking under institutional madness. His performance is so real, it's uncomfortable to watch the sweat, the sunburn, the exhaustion. Ian Bannon and Harry Andrews add layers of moral complexity as men trapped in a system that devours its own. Lumet shot in sequence under actual desert heat, forcing his cast to experience the same exhaustion as their characters. There are no orchestral swells, no melodrama, just sand, sweat, and silence. The result is suffocating authenticity. The Hill isn't about winning, it's about what happens when discipline replaces humanity. When critics called it too harsh, veterans simply nodded. They'd seen that hill before, only theirs wasn't made for the screen. Number 12. Reach for the Sky, 1956. Sometimes the truest war story sounds impossible until you realize it happened. Reach for the Sky tells the real-life story of Douglas Bader, the RAF pilot who lost both legs in an accident before the war, then returned to become one of Britain's greatest flying aces. Director Lewis Gilbert didn't take shortcuts. He worked closely with Bader himself, used real aircraft, and even staged flying sequences with operational Spitfires filmed at authentic airfields. The result wasn't just visually accurate, it felt spiritually true. Kenneth Moore's performance as Bader is remarkable not for heroics, but for restraint. He doesn't play a saint. He plays a man who refused to stop fighting, even when grounded by fate. The dialogue adapted from Paul. Brickhill's biography includes the real phrases, the real slang, and the real humor of RAF crews. There's no exaggeration, just the kind of banter men use to keep fear at bay. Gilbert's direction balances admiration with grit. Every cockpit scene feels suffocating. Every takeoff charged with both courage and calculation. What made the film resonate so deeply with audiences of the 1950s is its lack of artifice. No fake dramatics, no overblown speeches. Reach for the Sky treats bravery as something quiet, the choice to get back in the cockpit again and again. When it premiered, veterans praised it not as entertainment, but as memory. That's the difference between fiction and truth. One ends when the credits roll, the other never really does. Number 11. Aces High, 1976. In Aces High, the sky isn't freedom, it's a coffin painted blue. Set during the First World War, this film captures the deadly reality of early aviation with precision that still shocks modern pilots. The Royal Flying Corps officers in the film know they have a life expectancy of barely 3 weeks, and the movie makes sure you feel every second of it. Director Jack Gold and cinematographer Jerry Fisher refused to use model shots or stock footage. Instead, they built functioning replicas of First World War aircraft and filmed actual aerial combat using mounted cameras inside the cockpits. You can see the control wires tremble, the goggles fog, and the sunlight flicker across faces mid-flight, details that no studio could fake. The realism doesn't stop at the visuals. Malcolm McDowell, Christopher Plummer, and Peter Firth deliver performances that peel away the romantic myth of knights of the air. Their characters drink, joke, and fall apart emotionally, each mission pushing them closer to breakdown. Gold structured the film around repetition mission, death, replacement, repeat, mirroring the endless cycle that real pilots endured. The authenticity extends to dialogue drawn from diaries and letters of actual RFC officers. Even the mess hall songs are historically sourced. The result is a portrait not of glory, but of endurance. Aces High may be beautifully shot, but it's also devastatingly honest. By the time the credits roll, you realize the real battle wasn't against the enemy, it was against time itself. Number 10. The Cruel Sea, 1953. It begins not with victory, but with weather-rough seas, relentless gray, and the sound of engines pushing through Atlantic hell. The Cruel Sea wasn't about heroes, it was about endurance. Based on Nicholas Montserrat's novel and his own wartime service, this film captures the Battle of the Atlantic with brutal honesty. Director Charles Friend used real Royal Navy corvettes to stage the story, even shooting in storm conditions that wrecked equipment and seasick half the crew. Every technical detail from sonar pings to convoy formation came from first-hand accounts. The sea itself becomes the antagonist, indifferent and merciless. Jack Hawkins gives one of his career-best performances as Captain Erickson, a man leading men who have no illusions left. his voice cracking during a critical scene when he must give an order that will destroy both enemy and ally isn't acting flourish. It's authenticity distilled. The supporting cast, drawn from actual Navy veterans, ground the story with lived-in precision. The Cruel Sea was revolutionary because it replaced the idea of war glory with grim professionalism. There's no glamour here, just cold coffee, salt water, and the fear of radar blips in the dark. When the movie premiered, veterans reportedly sat in stunned silence not because of the drama, but because it felt like memory replayed. The realism was so sharp even naval instructors later used it for training reference. That's not fiction. That's respect. Number 9. Dunkirk, 1958. Before Christopher Nolan made his version, there was the original, and in many ways it remains the truest. Leslie Norman's Dunkirk doesn't look like a blockbuster, it looks like history unfolding in real time. Shot partly on the actual beaches of Dunkirk using surviving small boats from the evacuation, the film follows both soldiers stranded on the sand and civilians answering the call across the channel. Norman's direction avoids heroics. The camera doesn't glorify the chaos, it just observes it. You can almost feel the wind scraping across the lens. John Mills anchors the story as a weary corporal trying to lead his men to safety, while Richard Attenborough plays a reluctant civilian sailor who learns that courage doesn't come with rank. What sets the film apart is its attention to scale the endless beach, the line of helmets in the mist, the sound of distant engines that might mean rescue or doom. Unlike later versions filled with orchestral tension, this one lets the silence speak. Real veterans praised its restraint, no overdramatized speeches, no manufactured suspense, just the waiting, the fatigue, and the sheer disbelief that anyone made it home. When it premiered, British audiences recognized something uncanny. The authenticity wasn't in the visuals alone, it was in the rhythm of survival. Dunkirk doesn't tell you what courage looks like, it makes you sit beside it quiet and trembling until rescue finally arrives. Number 8. Zulu, 1964. Few films have captured British military precision and moral tension like Zulu. Directed by Cy Enfield, this retelling of the Battle of Rorke's Drift shows 150 British soldiers defending a mission station against thousands of Zulu warriors, and it gets nearly every detail right. Enfield, working with co-producer and star Stanley Baker, consulted military historians and South African archives to ensure authenticity. The real location of the battle was recreated with obsessive detail, the shape of the barricades, the uniforms, the sound of the bugle calls. Even the Zulu regiments were played by real descendants of the warriors who fought that day. Michael Caine, in his breakout role as Lieutenant Bromhead, embodies the aristocratic stiffness of an officer learning humility in crisis. The film doesn't vilify the Zulu. Instead, it portrays them as disciplined, strategic, and brave, a groundbreaking choice for its time. What gives Zulu its enduring realism is balance. The tactics, the fatigue, the psychological shift from fear to respect, all drawn from historical records. The film avoids false triumphalism. Victory here feels hollow, earned at a human cost. When shown to military historians, Zulu was praised for its accurate depiction of 19th century battle formation and discipline. Even today, it's studied for how it visualizes respect between enemies without sacrificing historical truth. Zulu isn't just a war film, it's a masterclass in how to film courage without propaganda. Number 7. The Longest Day, 1962. It took an army to make this film literally. The Longest Day remains one of the most ambitious and authentic depictions of D-Day ever captured on film. Based on Cornelius Ryan's meticulously researched book, it brings together British, American, French, and German perspectives into one sweeping, unified story. Directed partly by Ken Anakin, the British sequences stand out for their precision, from the real paratrooper insignia to the exact timing of airborne drops. Many scenes were filmed on the actual beaches and bridges of Normandy, including Pegasus Bridge, where some of the same gliders used in the real operation appeared on screen. The cast Richard Burton, Sean Connery, Kenneth More serves the story rather than overshadowing it, and even real D-Day veterans were brought in as extras to ensure every movement felt authentic. Shot in stark black and white to resemble wartime footage, the film captures not just the look, but the discipline and confusion of that day. Historians and veterans praise The Longest Day for its realism, calling it less a movie and more a memory on film, the closest anyone could get to reliving the morning when chaos met courage on the shores of Normandy. Number 6. Ice Cold in Alex, 1958. In Ice Cold in Alex, the battle isn't against an army, it's against the desert itself. This British classic turns survival into a slow, sunburned ordeal, and it nails every detail along the way. Director J. Lee Thompson adapted Christopher Landon's novel, itself based on his service in North Africa. The result feels less like a film and more like a memory. The story follows a small medical unit trying to cross the desert to Alexandria after their convoy is destroyed. The sand isn't just a backdrop, it's a living, suffocating force. John Mills, Sylvia Sims, and Anthony Quayle deliver performances that feel as parched as the setting. Thompson shot in real desert heat using improvised props to mimic the wartime vehicles. Even the uniforms fade progressively throughout the film, matching the actual bleaching effect of desert sun on fabric. But the real magic is in the details: the grinding gears of the ambulance, the creak of metal under stress, the silent panic when the fuel runs low. The title comes from the moment the survivors finally reach Alexandria and savor a cold drink, and you can practically taste their relief. Veterans of the North African campaign praise the film for getting it right. Not the battles, but the exhaustion, the dehydration, the sheer endurance of staying alive. Ice Cold in Alex doesn't glorify war. It humanizes survival. And it does it with such accuracy that it still feels modern decades later. Number 5. The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957. It's rare for a film to win 7 Academy Awards and still be described as historically faithful, but The Bridge on the River Kwai manages both. Directed by David Lean, this epic balances cinematic grandeur with an engineer's obsession for detail. Though based on Pierre Boulez's novel, Lean and his team used authentic blueprints and first-hand accounts from former prisoners to recreate the bridge and jungle environment with eerie precision. Filmed in Sri Lanka under extreme heat, the production crew endured many of the same hardships as their characters. Alec Guinness gives one of cinema's most disciplined performances as Colonel Nicholson, a man so bound by military order that he loses sight of its meaning. His portrayal mirrors real British officers' accounts of psychological survival through routine and structure. Lean's use of authentic tools, genuine jungle humidity, and real labor conditions made the film feel unsettlingly real. Even the bridge collapse, a practical explosion timed to perfection, became a technical legend. Despite small liberties, veterans confirmed the atmosphere was painfully accurate. The heat, the hierarchy, the quiet breakdown of morale. Lean wasn't filming a war story, he was dissecting pride under pressure. The Bridge on the River Kwai remains proof that truth and artistry don't have to be enemies. They can march in step when done with respect. Number 4. Battle of Britain, 1969. No film has ever captured air combat with such authenticity as Battle of Britain. Directed by Guy Hamilton, the same man who made The Colditz Story, it brought together historians, engineers, and actual fighter pilots to recreate the turning point of 1940. The film used over 100 real aircraft, including actual Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Messerschmitts, not models, not CGI. Each plane was restored to full flying condition, flown by veteran pilots who had fought in the war. The result? Aerial sequences so authentic that the Royal Air Force later used them for training films. Michael Caine, Laurence Olivier, and Trevor Howard lead a cast that captures the organized chaos of command and combat. The dialogue, drawn from real mission transcripts, preserves the clipped calm that pilots use to mask fear. Even the control room maps were copied from genuine wartime layouts at RAF Uxbridge. Ron Goodwin's score punctuates realism with emotion, but never overpowers it. The cinematography, vast skies, sunlight flashing off wings, makes you understand how fragile survival really was. Battle of Britain doesn't invent heroes, it remembers them. When it premiered, real RAF veterans attended and wept quietly, not from nostalgia but recognition. Few films have ever flown closer to the truth. Number 3. Overlord, 1975. A film that blends fiction and reality so seamlessly you can't tell where one ends. Overlord, directed by Stuart Cooper, follows a young British soldier named Tom from enlistment to D-Day, but it's not just a story, it's a time capsule. Cooper used real archival footage from Britain's Imperial War Museum and blended it with newly shot material filmed using period lenses and stock. The result? A black and white ghost of history where real soldiers and actors move through the same grain of film. Brian Sterner plays Tom with quiet humanity, no grand speeches, no heroics, just an ordinary young man facing fate. The tone is intimate, almost poetic, and the accuracy is jaw-dropping. The uniforms, drills, and language are straight out of authentic training manuals and interviews. The film builds toward the Normandy invasion, but instead of spectacle, it gives you inevitability. When the final landing scenes merge with actual D-Day footage, you realize what Cooper achieved: a bridge between documentary and drama, between the living and the remembered. Historians call it one of the most accurate emotional portrayals of wartime Britain ever filmed. Overlord isn't about strategy, it's about sacrifice, and that's what makes it unforgettable. Number 2. A Bridge Too Far, 1977. Richard Attenborough's masterpiece, A Bridge Too Far, is what happens when a film refuses to simplify history. Covering Operation Market Garden, the ambitious Allied attempt to capture bridges across the Netherlands, it's one of the most logistically accurate war films ever made. Every uniform, every insignia, every tactical map was vetted by military historians. The production team even reconstructed Dutch towns to match wartime layouts, and Attenborough insisted on filming in the actual locations where the battles took place. The cast, including Sean Connery, Michael Caine, Anthony Hopkins, and Dirk Bogarde, play real officers, often quoting directly from official reports and diaries. The film doesn't glamorize victory. It documents failure with brutal honesty. The realism extends to its visual scale. Thousands of extras, real paratroop drops, and genuine armored vehicles. Even the weather patterns were matched to historical conditions of September 1944. What makes A Bridge Too Far remarkable isn't just accuracy, it's fairness. It doesn't point fingers. It shows courage, confusion, and miscommunication colliding in one massive, tragic operation. When veterans watched it, they called it the closest thing to being there. You can't get higher praise than that. Number 1. The Dam Busters, 1955. It's the sound of innovation, the whirring of engines over moonlit water. The Dam Busters turned one of Britain's most daring missions into a cinematic legend, and it did it with stunning technical accuracy. Director Michael Anderson and writer R.C. Sheriff based every frame on real declassified RAF records and engineer Barnes Wallace's own diaries. The film recreates the testing and use of the revolutionary bouncing bomb with such care that actual engineering footage was used as reference. Richard Todd, himself a D-Day veteran, stars as Wing Commander Guy Gibson, capturing not just his professionalism but his human exhaustion. The film's use of real Lancaster bombers flown in formation for the cameras gives it a realism that CGI could never match. The production consulted surviving members of the squadron, even filming at their original base. Every call sign, radio phrase, and operation detail is period correct. When The Dam Busters premiered, it wasn't just a film, it was documentation. Audiences felt pride not because of patriotism, but because the movie got it right. Its realism even inspired future filmmakers. George Lucas famously studied its attack sequences while crafting Star Wars. To this day, no war movie blends engineering, emotion, and authenticity quite like The Dam Busters. It's not just a film, it's precision carved into celluloid. British war cinema didn't just dramatize history, it preserved it. These 15 films proved that accuracy doesn't mean boredom, it means respect. They showed the mud, the fear, the mistakes, and the courage that made the difference between survival and oblivion. Which of these films do you think got it most right? Let us know in the comments, and if you love stories where truth hits harder than fiction, subscribe, because the next countdown will take you even deeper into the real history behind the screen.